Alrighty, this is going to be a hopefully, quick presentation on how to defend the pro-life position. This has been a very effective presentation when done in person with many of my students, many of whom have now changed from being pro-choice to pro-life at a Christian high school that I teach at. So I'm prayerful and hopeful that all of you listening would be able to take what you can from this presentation, really try to dwell with each and every single argument that I'm presenting, along with each and every single one of the answers I give for the questions that I assume will happen and that during the debate did happen. So, if you want any access to this PowerPoint presentation for yourself to use in conversation with other people, especially pro-life individuals, I know they're quite ubiquitous, feel free to check the link in my channel. In my channel, I have a link that connects to a teacher pay teacher account so that you have access to this presentation and a whole lot of other presentations and debates and curricula that I've made. But without further ado, let's go on to the powerful pro-life position. So, onto this opening statement, which is really important to establish the right tone for this discussion. I really try to be very direct and clear about what pro-life is and what pro-choice is by not being pro-life, right? So consider what's actually meant and intended by that. The value of life, the call for responsibility, and logical biblical thinking. These things are all rejected by the horrid movement, which has come to be known by many as the pro-death movement, otherwise known with a greater euphemism as pro-choice. I will be arguing that the Bible is clear about the value of life. And if you're wondering why I'm bringing the Bible into this, number one, I'm a Christian. Number two, I was arguing against pro-choice Christians when I made this. So just be aware that that'll happen here and there. I will be arguing that the Bible is clear about the value of life, that science proves that biological life begins at conception, and that murder of innocent life is a eugenicist, racist, sexist, genocidal, postmodern foray into the evil, irresponsible, and demonic. I will also deal with the foolish and illogical arguments that opponents in the pro-choice camp will likely bring so that you might be better equipped to know how to deal with the most common claims in our culture. Even with Donald Trump in office, that doesn't necessarily mean that there will be much change to pro-choice, pro-life dialogue. So what we in the pro-life movement need to do is to continue to educate individuals who have been led astray by a postmodern culture that teaches them, in atheistic secular terms, that life is only what we define it to be and not some sort of real aspect of reality present within the material and the immaterial. So suffice it to say that you'll be more aware on how to answer some of these complicated questions. That being said, I do use a lot of secular sources in this presentation because not all pro-lifers are religious. There's a great number of secular pro-life groups that don't have any specific religious affiliation. So, specifically, why am I pro-life? Well, number one, it's because I'm pro-science. Now, these are not in the order of importance. These are just the order that I chose. Number one, and I'll start this again. Why am I pro-life? Because I'm pro-science. In the overwhelming consensus of scientists, I think in many cases, over 93, others and over 96% of scientists agree that life begins at conception. And that goes beyond political or ideological boundaries. Even liberals and people who identify as pro-choice, you still have a much higher percentage of that. Number two, because social justice begins at the womb. Under the Constitution, every single individual human being is entitled to the same protections. And firstly, the right to life before liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Number three, I am pro-woman. Abortion degrades women and allows men to use their bodies for sex and then throw them away without dealing with any of the consequences that come inherent to sex, along with removing the one profound, distinctive ability, among others, the really truly singular gestation-based profound ability that women have over and above men. And removing that ability or that consequence alters the power that women have in their society. Number four, because of the visible evidence from ultrasounds and MRIs, which show the baby to be a living, reacting, and growing human being. as in an individual who shares genetic similarity with the rest of the human species, sufficient to be considered a human being. And number five, because I believe in the scripture and objective morality, that both of those being founded in the reality of a personal theistic God who desires real outcomes in the world and desires real relationship with individual human beings. My first argument goes like this. God says that it is sinful to kill innocent life, and many atheists say the same. According to Christian, Jewish, and Muslims, and a whole host of other religious arguments, I'm sure Mormons are in agreement with this for the most part. Premise one, God condemns the unjustified murder of the innocent. Premise two, the unjustified murder of the innocent is what almost all abortions are. Therefore, God condemns almost all abortions. Now, to be clear, the only reason to put almost all is if you're with an audience that seems to misunderstand or misdefine abortion to include those medically necessary terminations of pregnancies that result in the death of the mother. I'm going to use that phrase, the medically necessary termination of a pregnancy that would otherwise result in the death of the mother. Those are not abortions, but in some audiences, they actually register that mentally as an abortion. So if they do, then say, if you define it that way, I wouldn't. I would say it's just a medically necessary termination of either the child's life or the mother's life for the living of at least one of them, right? That's a procedure in which we are choosing to save a life and give up another, not one in which we're just flippantly throwing one away. And so, since those are distinct, in reality, you could put this correctly after you've defined abortion rightly for the audience and medical termination for reasons other than abortion in the connotative sense. Then you could just change this to say the unjustified murder of the innocent is what all abortions are. Therefore, God condemns all abortions because the necessary medical termination of a child's life to save that of the mother is not an abortion in the connotative sense. So, atheist pro-life arguments, yes, there are many. This one is not necessarily a P1, 2, 3 logical deduction, as much as it is a lot of responses given by some secular pro-life group websites. So just understand where they're coming from here. Their first fact is that abortion restrictions do significantly decrease abortions, so they are effective. Number two, most later abortions are not for medical reasons, and so that excuse goes out the window. And number three, the zygote is a human individual, which again, they agree with us on that point too. Therefore, abortions are not universally justifiable and should be restricted or abolished. Again, even atheist groups can agree on these points. Make sure to broaden the dialogue. That way they understand this isn't just a Christian versus non-Christian discussion. There are many secular individuals, humanists, who would agree with us on this. Even if I disagree with their metaphysical foundations that explain axiologically the value of human life, put that aside for now, okay? Put that aside for now. Science and philosophy agree that the child is an individual living human being at conception. So premise one, whatever individual has their own human genetic code, which would otherwise develop into a growing human being, is a human. The zygote at conception or fertilization has their own genetic code, which develops into a growing human being. Therefore, the zygote at conception/fertilization is a human. Pretty simple. That's just a simple logical or philosophical approach to that. If you want to go with the scientific approach, again, focus on that human genetic code. If an individual has human genetic code, 23 from mom, 23 from dad, or something like that, the human genetic code from a human mother and a human father, that results in, under ideal conditions and healthy conditions, the development of a human individual, right? So, sperm and the egg meet, and that's sufficient. Then we have an individual human being who is neither their mother nor their father, but has information from both, who has the genetic code that will develop into a human life. If that's the case, then that is a human being by the most simple standard we can give, which is genetics. Not based off heartbeats, because you can make random excuses about adults who, for a minute, maybe their heart stops beating, so they stop being human, or consciousness. But again, that's not a good standard, or whatever else, responsiveness, quite yet. Instead, we would say, no, no, no. According to 96% of biologists in the I asked thousands of biologists when life begins, the answer wasn't popular article. 5,000 biologists, 89% identifying as liberal, okay? 85% identifying as pro-choice, yet 96% agreed with the statement, human life begins at conception. This isn't a political issue. On the matter of science, this is quite clear. Human life begins at conception because that's how life begins. Argument number three. In the case of grape and incest, there is no logical way that abortion makes the situation better. So we've already shown from previous arguments that the child in the womb is biologically, genetically, a living human individual, and that murder is the intentional removal of a life. Therefore, we know that abortion is murder because it's the intentional removal of a human life. This is reflected in the very fact that one side is pro-life and the other side is pro-choice. It's implicit in the names. Now, many times people ask, well, what about grape, right? What about SA? And what about the child born of SA? Should we force the mother to give birth to this child that they didn't consent to have? Now, let's just be clear about what's being said here, right? This person would at least admit, if they followed the argument so far from argument one and two, that abortion is murder. That's fact. That's true. If abortion is murder, then that means that they would be advocating for murder, aka abortion, and rape, right? Because the situations that we're presented with is a situation in which this horrible individual rapes, uh, does essay on this innocent woman, and as a result, she is now pregnant. That's one situation. That's horrible enough as it is. But what's worse, that situation or that same situation, but now add murder to the mix because you decide to kill the child. Which one is worse? Obviously, most almost everybody would agree that murder plus SA would be worse than just SA alone, and thus should be illegal. Well, abortion is murder. Therefore, abortion plus grape is worse than grape alone, and thus should be illegal. So I'm trying to get past those YouTube censors that try to, you know, not promote videos that use those words. Same with incest. You could make the exact same argument, kind of just slide that in, right? So just understand there's no logical way, and I mean that literally, like no logical way, that adding murder to the grape mix somehow makes this morally better. And not just logically, but evidentially too. Abortion does not fix women in these SA situations. Legally, it doesn't help them in any meaningful way whatsoever. Morally and logically, we already explained that if anyone should die, right, it should be the one who SA'd the woman and not the innocent baby. We'd be taking away an innocent life instead of taking away a guilty one. Again, adding murder to grape in no way makes anything better. Pretty clear on that one. Psychologically, now this one's really clear. A lot of people say, oh, well, this will help her. No, it won't. Your plan is to fix trauma by adding more trauma. Do you know how traumatic an abortion is on a woman? And this is something that's interesting. A lot of pro-choice people actually use this in order to disparage or respond to a lot of pro-life individuals. They'll say to pro-life people who cast these women down, saying, oh, well, a lot of women are just so flippantly throwing their babies away, which is factually true. And they're doing it without much consideration, which is factually true. A lot of women are, not all, a lot. And a lot of pro-choice individuals will say they're not just walking into these clinics and then just, throwing their kids away. This is a very traumatic experience for these women. They're brave for the choice they're making. Now, while I would disagree with the claim brave, I would agree with them when they say that it's a traumatic experience. That is true. As a matter of fact, from the citations below at the bottom of this page, you can see that abortion leaves women with lifelong trauma, depression, worsened sleep due to nightmares, lower self-esteem, constant feelings of guilt and regret, and a couple other things that are found in the articles. You can see this at the bottom if you want to. Psychologically, it just makes everything worse for the woman. So why would I add the psychological and physical trauma of an abortion to a woman who just experienced SA. That's worse for her, just in general. It's worse for her. So it doesn't help anything. It doesn't fix anything. Some people say, oh, well, she'll have to carry this child. I'm telling you, the trauma of carrying a child, according to these studies, is significantly less than that of getting an abortion. Number one. Number two, if you wanted to, you could just advocate for this woman getting financial support from the person who committed the essay, from the government, in order to support this woman in her 8 or 9 months along. That way she's financially supported, so she doesn't have to worry about a job or anything. And so she's able to just make it through those 9 months, give birth to her child, and choose whether she wants to take care of the child or if she wants to give the child up for adoption. You could get the government to change itself instead of trying to just force the child to be killed. There's ways around this. Instead of just choosing death, there are other choices. Believe it or not. And number four, biologically, there actually seems to be in some women, based off the kind of abortion they get, there is an increased chance of developing breast cancer. That's quite interesting. Yeah, still trying to figure out the connection there. So no, it doesn't fix these women. Argument number four. This is more polemic, okay? I get it. But in order to get to the heart of pro-choice individuals, you'll notice that a lot of pro-choice speakers often speak with a lot of polemic, with a lot of rhetoric and emotional appeal. My pro-life pals, we got to learn to do the same thing. We can't just argue with logic and facts. Trust me, I've tried. And it is helpful for some people. It is helpful for some people, okay? I'm not going to say that some people nobody cares about logic, but the vast majority of the people in these pro-choice communities really care about emotional rhetoric and the various political persuasions that are underlying their worldview. So you really have to appeal to that to get at the heart of pro-choice people. If you can get to the heart and kind of clear out some of the gunk, then their head will be more likely willing to accept the facts. So let's use some of their own more likely liberal propaganda type terms to get their emotional appeal. The fun fact is, though, is that even for our emotional appeals, there's actual data and facts supporting it. So we're not lying, we're just using more emotion than we normally would. For instance, abortion is genocide, infanticide, eugenics, ableist, and racist. And this is factually true. Genocide and infanticide. How is abortion that? Well, 60 million abortions performed in the US alone since 1973. That's actually increased since this statistic came out. 60 million lives lost. That is more than all of the lives lost in World War II, and that is equivalent to 10 Holocausts. Then, eugenics and ableism. How is abortion eugenics and ableist? Well, according to the Planned Parenthood website, Sanger, the woman behind the Planned Parenthood agency, right, and all these different Roe v. Wade, all these institutions, Margaret Sanger believed in eugenics, an inherently racist and ableist ideology, that labeled certain people unfit to have children. Eugenics is a theory that society can be improved through planned breeding for desirable traits and like intelligence and industriousness. This is from Planned Parenthood's own website. Same with the racism claim. More on Margaret Sanger, the major advocate for Roe v. Wade and abortion. In doing so, she undermined reproductive freedom and caused irreparable damage to the health and lives of generations of Black people, Latino people, Indigenous people, immigrants, people with disabilities, people with low incomes, and many others. Now, fun fact, because you might be thinking, oh, well, just because something was rooted in racism and eugenics and all that, does that really mean that it will have that today? Well, according to a leftist worldview, a liberalistic worldview that's rooted in critical race theory and Marxism, yes, they often accuse America of being institutionally and inherently racist because it was built on the backs of slaves or because it had racism for so long institutionalized in its system that no matter how much America has progressed ethically, morally, and legally, it doesn't matter. It is inherently racist because of where it started. This is a leftist worldview. This is how they approach the notions of racism, patriarchy, intersectional institutionalization of various power structures. This is leftist rhetoric and leftist ideology that's fundamental to Marxist thought. So if you're arguing with these people, point out that they make the claim that if something is rooted in a racist, eugenicist, ableist, genocidal framework, then it cannot escape that according to their worldview. According to their worldview, the only way to surmount this kind of system that's rooted in racism is to overthrow the system. And you know what? I agree. Overthrow Planned Parenthood, overthrow Roe v. Wade, which kind of already got to that a bit, overthrow abortion as an institution. Use their rhetoric, guys. We have to appeal to their hearts. Use their own language against them to show them that this is not something they can consistently support, given their own worldview and beliefs about the notion of intrinsic racism and inherent racism in government supported institutions. And this is a good way if you want to frame it this way. That's one way, vast majority, about 67% of abortions in America kill minorities, which means it is a racist institution because it predominantly goes after minority communities. You can also say this for the fact that it's going after children, so it's genocidal in the fact that it's going after children, it's infanticidal as a result, and it's ableist. Ableism is discrimination in favor of able-bodied people. Abortion effectively and actively discriminates against disabled people by killing them, and you'll see more about this on a different slide. Therefore, abortion is a racial and infanticidal genocide that has led to the deaths of millions of predominantly minority children. Genocide of all kinds is evil and should not be allowed. Abortion is genocide. Therefore, abortion is evil and should not be allowed. Now, if you want some evidence for ableist data on abortion, it's really sad, actually. About 20% of all pregnancies are aborted, but about 90% of babies with spina bifida are aborted, as are 92% of babies with Down syndrome. This is, of course, in addition to the babies who are aborted for social reasons, without their disability being detected. So it's pretty upsetting if you check out A Disabled Person's Perspective on Eugenic Abortion. Really interesting article. It has a lot to say about this. A lot to say. It's sad to think that these people who are arguing in favor of increasing and loudening disabled voices, the voices of disabled people. I went to Brown University. I heard all this stuff. I heard all this rhetoric about lifting up disabled voices, but the moment it comes to an abortion rally and they're marching out there, all that rhetoric goes to the wayside. They don't care about disabled people, guys. They never cared. It was just rhetoric they said in their high towers in academia to try to sound like they care about disabled people. When it comes down to it, they don't care. They see these people as lacking in industriousness and not functioning in their communistic utopia society. And if you lack utility, then what good are you? Get rid of those people. It seems to be part of the Marxist philosophy, and it pours out of liberalism like a fount. It's insane. And it's consistent. It's very sad. Oh, that was for my students, just to prove that I didn't cheat, that I predicted all of the questions they would ask beforehand, like this. So, I decided to preemptively guess any and all questions that my students during this debate would bring up. And of course, for all of you watching, I'm sure you've heard these questions before as well. Listen up because these questions are very common and the answers I give are pretty concise and helpful. If you memorize these answers and understand them, which is more important, don't just memorize, understand them, then you'll be prepared to deal with a lot of the pro-choice arguments online and in person. You ready? Here we go. It's just a clump of cells. I mean, what's the big deal? It's just a clump of cells. When people say this, remind them, right, that they're assuming in a very reductive sense that all this is, even though they already biologically recognize that it's, a human being that is living, it is a human life that has begun at conception. So it's not just a clump of cells, it's a human being clump of cells. And once you explain to them, since that's already been proven, because that's scientifically the consensus, right? Once we've already shown that that's like the best necessary explanation for what the child is, then you could say, okay, so a clump of cells is just a large accumulation of living cells. Look to the bottom left if you want to see how I'm tracking this. So then a fetus is a clump of cells, right? A fetus is a clump of cells. And so is a baby that has been born. And so is an adult. Every human being, if all you take us for is just materialistic bodies of living information in the form of cells, then every human being is a clump of cells. So what's your point? That doesn't make them suddenly less valuable. If you want to say something being a clump of cells, a large accumulation of cells, makes them less valuable, that applies not just to the fetus, but that also applies to the baby and the adult because we are all by that standard not accounting for a soul, which as a Christian obviously I would, but not accounting for a soul, by that standard we are all just various sized clumps of cells, and therefore that argument means that you can kill anybody because everybody's a clump of cells. It's a stupid argument that doesn't actually get at anything, because then we'd have to kill every human, or we'd be justified in killing any human because every human is just a clump of cells. Not a good argument, right? Now if somebody believes in the soul and they tried to argue for this point, I would still say, well, no, the soul inhabits the individual at the moment of fertilization and conception as well. But a lot of the people you talk about this with probably won't view the soul as relevant here. And so just, know the response to it's just a clump of cells, not even an argument. This is just helpful to remind them it's also not just a clump of cells, even though we already proved this logically and we already showed the biological consensus on this. For some people, I don't know why. I don't know why. But for some people, they still forget this stuff. So remind them and also show them some of the images so they remember what this actually is. Well, it is just a fetus, or is it just an embryo? I don't know. That's all it is. Do you know what those words even mean? Again, go back. We already proved from the logical argument before, guys. We already proved that at the moment of conception, at least according to around 96% of all scientists around the world, beyond pro-life, pro-choice distinctions, right? Around 96% of all scientists around the world agree the child is a living human being at the moment of conception. So it doesn't matter what term you want to apply, fetus, embryo, it doesn't matter. Living human being at the moment of conception. Any other way to try to swing around this is a rejection of the scientific consensus on it. It doesn't matter if it's just a fetus or an embryo, it is a living human being. And again, if they're trying to just reduce it back to the whole clump of cells thing, then say, okay, so every human being is just a clump of cells by that standard. If all you see us as are accumulations of living cells, good job. That's us. So it doesn't actually change anything. Planned Parenthood, the biggest abortion provider in the US, even explains that abortion kills life after it has begun. It doesn't matter. I don't care what term you want to use. Fetus, embryo, doesn't matter. We all still agree. Human life. Human life. So terms to know. Baby is an unborn or recently born human being from Webster's Dictionary. Embryo is the unborn baby from end of week 1 through week 8. Fetus is the unborn baby from end of week 8 to birth. Human being is a genetic member of the species Homo sapiens, right? Because genetics is actually how we really classify this stuff. And how do you know when someone has the genetics necessary to be included in that species distinction? At conception, when they have their own genetic code. Therefore, the distinction of human life and a human being begins at conception because that's our genetic categorization of a human being. And life, or live or living, is an organism with the following qualities: cellular organization, growth and development, metabolism, homeostasis, which means self-maintenance basically, responsiveness to stimuli of some sort. That's not just light and sound, but also to chemical stimuli, hormonal stimuli, right? Blood flow. Reproductive capacity, as in, even having the chromosomes or the information within you for the development of some sort of reproductive capability, given ideal situations, and contains all the genetic information needed to control its development for its lifetime, all of which is present at conception. Yes, all of it. That's true. So just know those definitions. It helps a lot of people, even pro-choice people. They say these terms and they don't know what it means. But also, again, if they say those terms, just remember, fetus, embryo, it doesn't matter. We already agreed life begins at conception. That is when a living human being becomes a living human being. This is a common one. This one's a little bit strange. I'm not gonna lie. A little strange why people say this. They'll say, well, I would never do an abortion, but we shouldn't tell others what to do. I would never get an abortion, but it just feels wrong to tell people that they shouldn't do this or that with their bodies. So there's a couple ways to approach this. Number one, you could say, oh, well, why would you never do an abortion? And the person will say, oh, Well, because it's just too graphic and gruesome, you're just killing a baby. Well, when you hear them say that, you're like, oh, so you admit it's killing a baby. And they're like, well, yeah, that's why I would never do it. And then you say, okay, so you agree that anyone else who gets an abortion, they're killing a baby. They'd say, well, yeah. And they'd be like, oh, that's wrong. I'm like, good. Yeah, so we should tell them to not do that, right? And they're like, yeah. Another way, if that's a little bit too complicated, say, what if you say to someone, well, I would never own a slave, but I don't think that we should tell others to stop owning them. Those people would probably say, what are you, racist? I'm like, no, no, no. Making a point. If you believe that something is fundamentally wrong, if there's a moral issue which is fundamentally wrong, i.e., the value of a human life, then you should call others to the same moral standard because it's a fundamentally wrong issue. It's a fundamentally moral evil. If it's fundamentally evil, then you should call others to stop doing it. So if you wouldn't do it for some fundamental reason, which is what this is, a fundamental evil, because it's a rejection of human value, then you should hold people to that standard, especially in a functioning society that holds that all humans are endowed with certain liberties, certain rights, namely life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. My body, my choice. Very common, overdone, and also factually wrong. The child's body is not your body. The child is a genetically distinct individual developing. And if they say, oh, so they're still developing, so they're not a human yet, I would say, well, every human being is developing at every stage of their life. So no, the fact of development does not negate humanity or humanness. Stupid. No, the child is a genetically distinct individual who is developing like any other human being that is a genetically distinct individual who's developing. And if you use the violinist argument at this point, then you would be proving my exact point. And if you know the violinist argument, you'd actually show that because in the violinist argument, it presupposes or explains that it's an individual human being who has their own body and life connected to you, which actually means that they recognize that that really is a separate individual with a separate body and a separate life. Okay? But separately, there is something more absurd about this claim, my body, my choice. If they want to make the claim, then what they'd have to claim are the following things, right? Because if they're saying whatever is developing inside of them, all of those organs that are developing in that baby are actually the mother's own body, not the baby's body, the mother's own body. So that means for about 9 months, each mother has not just her vagina, but also a penis. If she's developing a baby boy, she also has a penis as part of her body. Or if she's developing a baby girl, she has two sets of vaginas, right? I'm not here to be crass, it's just biologically true. She would have two sets of female reproductive organs, one for herself and the one developing within her. Her body still, though, apparently, is what they say. She would have two sets of lungs, her own and this new body she's developing. She has two hearts. She has all these different organs. She has two brains, even two consciousnesses. If you want to take into account a soul, now apparently she has two souls, right? Two souls about her. This doesn't make any sense. To say that a woman, a mother, has one pair of sexual reproductive organs, a vagina, but then also because she has a baby boy, she now also has as part of her body a penis. That's insane. A woman does not have a vagina and a penis. That goes against the biological understanding of a woman. And then we'd have to say that every single woman who is a mother was like that, or she has two sets of reproductive female organs. Or if she has twins of opposite sexes, then we'd have to say that she has, all these different pairs of sexual reproductive organs, other than that which is proper to a woman, biologically speaking. So that's absurd to say my body, my choice, given the ramifications of that on our understanding of female anatomy, right? Uh, that's what I would say. So, if anything, I'm pro-choice, pro the child's choice, The child, and some would say, oh, the child can't make a choice yet. Exactly. So let's let the child come out of the womb and grow old enough, neurologically, psychologically, such that they can make their own choices about their life. So, you could say my body, my choice, but number one, it's not your body, and number two, it really isn't your choice. It's the child's choice. So let's let the child make a choice. Some say only a woman can talk about abortion. No uterus, no opinion. Actually, as a man, I can talk about abortion, right? Here's some ways to combat this common claim. Are you a cloud? Can't talk about clouds then. Have you done incest? Can't talk about incest then. Have you ever stolen from a store? Can't talk about theft then. Are you a man? Then you can't talk about how men should feel about abortion. Are you currently a baby? Then you can't talk about the rights of a baby. What if I identify as a woman right now? Do I suddenly gain the ability to talk about abortion? And finally, so since men have no say or responsibility in abortion and pregnancy, then they shouldn't have any responsibility in taking care of children, right? Should all men be deadbeat, absent fathers? And even during the pregnancy, since we have no say in the pregnancy or abortion, the man doesn't need to care for his wife when she's pregnant, right? Well, you start to get a whole lot of no's or that's nonsense or that doesn't make any sense. And that's good. I agree. Because you don't need to be a cloud in order to talk about clouds. You don't need to be a leaf in order to talk about leaves or trees. You don't need to have a uterus in order to talk about pregnancy or abortion, in order to have a say in this. That's illogical and nonsensical. Again, brain dead arguments. Just admit that they are, explain them with some helpful analogies, and then move on. Only religious people are pro-life. So to be clear, this isn't an argument, it's just a claim they're making. So number one, just say that's not an argument. And you can move on if you want to. You can just move on. But you can also say, okay, number one, it's not an argument, but number two, you're just wrong. Secularprolife.org, feministforlife.org, Black pro-life, rehumanizeinternational.org, and Feministas de la Nueva Ola, WordPress.com. All these different sites talk about the large number of women, atheistic or non-atheistic, who are part of the pro-life movement. And so it's quite clear that there's atheists and religious people, racial and ethnic minorities, racial and ethnic majorities who advocate for pro-life. It's not a religious only position. Abortion restrictions do not decrease the number of people getting abortions, as secular pro-life outlines, as I showed earlier. It most definitely does, okay? It actually does. And you can check out any of these articles that talk about the clear relationship between abortion restrictions and the number of people getting abortions. It's very clear the connection between these. Living far from an abortion facility had twofold the odds of still seeking an abortion or planning to continue pregnancy at the fourth week, says a follow-up survey. Barriers intersect to not just delay, but to prevent people from obtaining abortion. The abortion rate is predicted to fall by 32.8% in the year following a Roe reversal, right? This is all really impressive stuff. Yeah, okay, but they aren't fully developed. Okay. If someone says, yeah, okay, but they're not a fully developed human being yet. When do humans stop developing? I legitimately want to know this. This is so stupid to me. Oh, do you stop developing the moment you come out of the womb? Oh, you keep on growing. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I'm sure you have all of your rational faculties by the age of one, right? Oh, you have to learn more things and learn how to walk and talk, all that. Oh, okay. Well, I'm sure you stop developing when you're a teenager, right? Oh, you go through puberty? Oh, that sounds tough. Wouldn't want to do that. Not again, at least. Oh, wait, when you're an adult, you have to go through like adulthood and then eventually middle age, and there's changes in your metabolism and all that. Sounds tough. Oh, and eventually old age, so your body starts to slow down and stuff. That's crazy. At what point do humans stop developing? Like, what kind of argument is this? Are you saying, you know, the only people who are fully developed human beings are like old people? Because, well, no, they're still developing technically. You could say that they're still developing and still learning and still growing. So, no, the claim that somebody has to be fully developed in order to be a human being is nonsensical because every human being continues to develop. Life is a sequence of changes and processes, not, you know, pure material sanctification of the body outside of the womb the moment that you're born. It's not like any of us have arrived in some material sense, and definitely not in any spiritual sense. But also, what if someone is born without an arm? Does that mean that they just stop being a human all of a sudden? If someone is born with no arms, no legs, are they just not a human being out of nowhere? They're just not a human being. Obviously, these are still humans. So, what do they mean by being fully developed? What does that mean? Well, that isn't even a baby yet. Again, just go back to all of the definitions. We already talked about it. Just go back to all the definitions. Even Planned Parenthood says abortion kills life after it has begun. So it doesn't matter if they say, "Oh, it's not a baby yet." Okay, so it's a human being. Who cares? Like, you're missing the point. You're missing the argument, right? It's like, oh, you like this hospital. This hospital is being built. It's not a hospital yet, but it's being built, and someone lights the whole thing on fire, and it's an arson. It's an arson attack, right? And people are crying over it, like, oh no, the hospital. And someone goes up and says, it wasn't a hospital yet. Like, it's okay. It's not that big of a deal. It was going to be. Like, that was the whole point of the process of it being built up. We shouldn't force disabled people to be born into a life that will be difficult for them. This is so, like, pretentious and completely removed and detached from actual life of disabled people. Everyone, because they're saying like, oh, disabled people have uniquely difficult lives that make their lives less worth living, right? So if someone's going to be born with Down syndrome, well, their life just isn't worth living because their life is going to be so difficult and tough, and if someone's going to be born into a poor environment, also, their life is going to be so tough. Do you really want them to have to suffer as a poor person? Ugh, right? Or they're going to be born with, difficulties walking. And so, really, that life is not going to be worth it, right? If you're going to have significant difficulty in your life, it is not worth living. So, let's just kill them before they end up suffering in life. Fun fact, everyone suffers in life. Even top athletes who are physically fit, fully able-bodied, many of them end up getting depression or even committing suicide. Some people who are super geniuses, fully present and fully abled, above fully abled in their mental faculties, they get depressed and they'll end their lives. They'll have anxiety and torments and all this stuff. The richest rich and the most famous people struggle with depression and suicidality. The notion that, oh, only disabled people are the people who suffer, only disabled people are the ones who are going to have tough lives. No, even the most rich and wealthy people end up ending their lives because they don't see the value in it. So if we're saying, oh, any form of significant difficulty or struggle is warrants for the ending of a life before the person has had a chance to live out their life fully, well, we'd have to apply that to every single human being, not just disabled people. Disabled people, right? Or, people who have at least different abilities than you. Also, by that standard, disability doesn't change the value of life, right? Or different abilities doesn't change the value of life. You could have better vision than me. That doesn't mean that I am less valuable than you. I even said to my students during this debate, how many of you think that you're around the same place as me in terms of speech, communication, research ability, and intellectual faculties? And none of my students raised their hands because they're a very humble bunch. I think a couple of them actually are, or at least, in a couple of years of time with education, they will be at where I am at. But in either case, they're a humble bunch, so none of them said anything. And I said, oh, okay. Well, since I have greater intellectual ability than you, that means you're disabled compared to me. Therefore, I have the right to, justify your murder before you were born. They were all in an uproar saying, what? You want to kill us? I'm like, no, no. What I'm saying is that some people say disability or having less and fewer abilities than other people means your life isn't worth living. And that's nonsense. Just because you have different abilities or less ability than other people have doesn't mean your life is worth less than theirs. Everyone differs in their abilities. That's just how it is to be a human. And that doesn't mean we should just kill everyone who will struggle in life, because that's everybody. If they bring up the violence argument, actually point out the fact that that destroys their my body, my choice argument. Even the person who wrote that argument, who framed the argument, Judith Jarvis Thompson, concedes in her paper that the fetus is a living human person, which is why in the violence argument, it's a living human person connected to you. So you'd have to accept that premise for the argument. Well, the moment you accept that that's a living human person, then you would say, oh, we should not kill a living human person, an innocent fetus. And then you realize that it's a false analogy in the first place. In one case, you're letting a sick adult die. In the other case, you are actively and intentionally taking the life of an innocent child who would normally develop into a healthy individual or a living, a developing individual, just as they are then, right? So in one case, you're letting a sick adult die who's already dying. The other case, you're preventing the continued life of someone who's already actively living and growing and developing. They're opposite situations. So it's a false analogy, almost a complete opposite analogy. If they bring up the fertility clinic on fire thought experiment, it goes like this, and I'll just read it really quick so you know where we're at. It goes like this. You're in a burning fertility clinic and hear a 5-year-old child crying out for help. Across the room is a container marked 1,000 viable human embryos, so they're all living human beings. The flames are rising, smoke is filling the air, and you can only save one, the child that's crying, or the container of embryos. According to the original person making the thought experiment, Tomlinson, if you would choose to save the crying child, you're betraying the fact that, whatever you may say, you really believe embryos aren't equivalent to human beings. However, how otherwise could you justify saving one over 1,000? Now, this is a false gotcha. All right, this is a false gotcha. Very clearly. Number one, the question on my end is not, what would you do? The question is, what should you do? They're trying to make this a personal, emotional thing based off of personal experiences of our experiences with, infants, but that doesn't change the fact that, again, it's not what would you do, but what should you do? I should save as many lives as I could. But also, number two, this isn't related to abortion. First of all, as I state at the bottom here, this argument has nothing whatsoever to do with abortion. In no instance does a woman or her doctor have to choose between saving the life of one child at an advanced stage of development or 1,000 at an earlier stage. That doesn't mean anything. Abortion involves the purposeful, willful, intentional killing of one or multiple children who, in most cases, would have lived if left alone. The fertility clinic on fire one says that they would have died if left alone. So it's completely opposite situations. Number one. And number two, no mother who's thinking about an abortion is thinking, oh, it's between me killing this child. So basically setting the abortion clinic on fire, killing this child and saving 1,000 lives. That's not a thing that the mother is thinking. For an abortion, she just wants to kill the child. There is no consideration of 1,000 other viable embryos. There's no analogy here, which means that this fails as an argument for abortion. If they bring up the sperm equals living entity argument and saying, oh, so every time someone has a nocturnal emission, he just killed a couple 100 million or billion, human beings. No, we already explained that human life begins at conception. That's fertilization. So when does human life begin? When a sperm meets an oocyte or an egg. Then, at the moment of conception, when the sperm meets the egg, then they form an individual human being with the sufficient genetic data proper for development. That's when life begins. So this is known as the straw man fallacy. Again, just going based off the definitions we already presented, and we already described what this is. Any argument or example they give that which has to do with sperm or egg separately is irrelevant and misinformed. These are some questions you could ask them. Do you know biologically what would make someone alive? Just to make sure we're on the same page. Number two, do you support the genocide of disabled people? You might say this sounds like polemic or this sounds like strong emotional rhetoric. Pro-choice people do this all the time and it swings pro-choice audiences all the time. Get real. Become aware of modern dialogue and rhetoric. It works for them. We have to accept that and start using their rhetoric too. Do you support the genocide of poor people? Do you support eugenics like Margaret Sanger did? Do you agree that America is an inherently racist institution, given your CRT, your critical race theory framework, your Marxist framework, and all these things that are at the base of your liberal modern worldview? Do you agree that America is an inherently racist institution because it was rooted and institutionally started in racism, in patriarchy, and whatever else? If they say yes, and then you say, okay, so that's how institutions work. They have to be overthrown. By your standard, they have to be overthrown based off their roots, their origins. Therefore, since Margaret Sanger and the entirety of Planned Parenthood and Roe v. Wade was rooted in eugenics, racism, and ableism, that means that it also must be overthrown by your standard. So you should not be supporting the institutionalization or support of abortion because it is essentially an inherently racist, ableist, genocidal, maleficent institution that is rooted in patriarchy, power structures, whatever else. That's it. Use their terms against them. Stop playing around. Take this stuff seriously. Use rhetoric. They do, and it works. If they bring up a woman should not be forced to care for something that she doesn't want, just explain all the different cases that would be relevant for them. If an immigrant makes you feel uncomfortable, a totally legal immigrant makes you feel uncomfortable, and you feel that they are impeding your career opportunities by taking your jobs, should you be allowed to kill them because you don't want to deal with them in your life? If you are an upper class neighborhood, someone of a racial group that you don't like walks into your neighborhood, should they be killed since you don't want them around you? Trying to identify or equate the value of someone's life to your desire to care for them, accept them, that makes you into a sociopath. You're psychotic. What are the actual, if they bring up overpopulation, you can bring up some of the data I have on overpopulation, ask them questions about that. At what point does the killing stop? At what point will you stop treating people as less than human to justify your extermination and oppression of them? At what point will you stop all this abortion? Oh, whoops, sorry. That wasn't abortion. That was a different time in history where people decided to treat people as less than humans to justify your extermination or oppression of them. That was the Muslim slave trade. Well, I'm sure abortion's around here somewhere. Oh, the Trail of Tears? No, that was another case where that happened. But I'm sure we would never do the same thing as we did back then. We would never redefine what a human is to justify poor treatment, extermination, and oppression. No, that was chattel slavery of the Americas based off of the African tribes that would sell their own people into slavery or sell the people of neighboring warring African tribes into slavery to the Europeans that got sent off into Latin America, the Caribbean, and South America and North America. So no, that's just another case of us redefining what a human is to justify our treatment of them. No, that was the Holocaust and its treatment of minorities, Jewish people, people with disabilities, and gypsies. That was a different time where we decided to redefine it. I know abortion is around here somewhere. There it is. Pro-choice. My body, my choice. The baby is just a burden, not even human. Good job, pro-choicers. You've echoed the same thing that was at the root of the Muslim slave trade, affecting a lot of young women. The same thing that was at the root of the Trail of Tears and chattel slavery that you say is so evil in the Holocaust. Same exact ideology. Redefine what counts as a human being in order to oppress and exterminate. When will it stop? And what about these people? 90% of preborn children with Down syndrome are aborted. In some countries, it's actually, I think, 100%. In Greenland or Iceland, I'd have to check again, but it's around 100%. Why are the lives of the disabled worth less than your life? Why? So, at the end of this, as a closing statement, I just want to make sure everybody's very clear on what's being said. With all that I've shown, I have shown that the pro-life position is a better position biblically, logically, biologically, psychologically, philosophically, and morally, and overall evidentially. In every respect, from science and logic, pro-life is the best and correct position. Will you be intelligent, honest people who are open-minded enough to admit that pro-life is the more logical position? Or will you stubbornly refuse to see reality and truth for what they are, choosing to live in a world of make-believe that justifies murder, genocide, racism, ableism, and the devaluation of humanity? The choice is yours, but I say choose life. And with that being said, God bless you all. Have a wonderful night. I pray that you make good use of this resource, that you share this around to any pro-choice people you know, that they take the time to listen, they take the time to understand each argument, and that they're open-minded enough to fight for life.